Greetings, class. This is Professor Palmeno, and for this week, we will be discussing the concepts of ideology and hegemony. First, let's start off with some of the basic concepts. As in with the basic concepts, we have our ideas on society and what society thinks. It is based on a preconceived ideas. The assumption is usually made that experiences are shared, usually through individuals and such who have similar experiences with forming ideas on society, on how society works. Really, we tend to think of our experience being unique, but also that another person may have experienced that as well, and that we could share that experience with another individual, say in telling a story or relating to somebody, as in, hey, did this happen to you or did that happen to you? Or even with likes or dislikes with movies, TV shows, with books, with video games, with different subsets of groups that like to do different activities or different hobbies. The assumption is made that experiences are shared. Because it happened to one person, then it is assumed that it could happen to another. Say you had a really great time at this one place and you wanted to share that experience with somebody else, or maybe that person had that experience and you could have a discussion. But maybe that person has never been there or has never heard of it. So you go to a really nice restaurant and then you meet another individual who went to that restaurant too, and you both enjoyed it and you talk about the experience, as opposed to somebody who has not been to that restaurant that you went to, or a place, or um, somewhere else. And you will have nothing to talk about regarding that restaurant, that shared experience. I'm sure you could try to find common ground, but from that experience, you don't have that in common. So the experiences could be the same, where you went to one place, you went to another place, or something happened to you, something else happened to another person. Experiences could be the same. So you start to believe if this occurs, then it must occur to everyone. So your worldview at this point becomes very limited. So if this occurs, then it must occur to everyone. How can it work? So we look at the general versus the individual. And we look at the general versus the individual, we're looking at ideas that are both general or individual ideas. So we could take an idea that somebody has had, or a general idea that somebody has come up with, and we could look at those differences. What is assumed by many may not be shared by the individual. Say you had similar experiences, say you're in a group of friends and they're talking about the vacations they take, but you've never taken a vacation because you don't get enough time off from work to go to a vacation, but everybody else does. Or you have the assumption that everybody has the same level of income, or everybody lives in the same type of neighborhood, or problems that people have never even experienced. When this happens, the individual is left out. What is assumed by many may not be shared by one individual. In this case, that individual is left out from this group. The assumed general idea is then adopted by the consensus, by the group. The group usually forms the idea as in, well, everybody or almost everybody shared this experience. So let us adopt this idea as this idea exists, and it almost happens to everybody except very few individuals. So the individual is not part of the majority. The individual does not have that same experience that the majority has, because that person may have not done this, or that person may not have done that. That person may have no experience with a certain situation, a certain event, going to a certain place. If you're within a group of individuals who went to a certain place over the weekend, and then you're the one person who didn't go, then that individual is not part of the majority. And maybe you didn't have time to go. Maybe you're at work. Maybe you're taking care of your kids. Maybe you're taking care of your family. Maybe you just didn't have the transportation available. Or you really just didn't feel like going. So you're not part of that majority of that group. And you could say, well, we're taking the micro here of this situation. We could apply it to the macro as well. The individual acts that make up the general idea are favored over those that do not. So when we take the group, their ideas seem to take hold through, I guess you could say, democratic rule, where the majority rules, where those ideas come into the greater consensus as opposed to just one person who does not have that shared experience. So those general ideas are favored over those that do not, because that makes up the larger part of the group. Say there's a large group of individuals who didn't go to college, and you may be the only person that has gone to college. And excuse me, it's not going to look very favorable to that small group. You're going to be the outlier. Specifics of the group versus the specifics of the individual. In this case, usually the specifics of the group take precedent over the specifics of the individual. So let's look at society now. What is generally assumed by society? What we have and what we don't. Similar to what I was discussing earlier. We all assume that we have a home to go to. And what I mean by home, it can be in a house, an apartment, maybe a room, a trailer, etc. We all make the assumption that we have a home to go to, or transportation, such as a car, a truck, motorcycle, scooter, bicycle, etc. We all have this assumption that people have transportation, they know how to get around. Notice that I didn't include public transportation because that's not something that is considered by our society as in something that's entirely reliable, because public transportation does not operate on all hours, well, at least in certain areas, does not operate on all hours. I mean, there's Uber, you could call Uber, yes, that's one method of getting around. But the assumption is made that you're independent, you're reliable, you have your transportation. Employment, there's an assumption that you have a career or a job, full-time, part-time, or maybe even have some temp work, that you are stable, that you are independent. That's usually what's generally assumed by society. That you may have some knowledge, a formal education, a graduate, or a high school degree, trade school, or maybe even none. There's people that didn't finish high school. There's people that didn't even get past middle school. But there's some assumption that you have some general education, some knowledge, that you have an understanding of the way the world works. Also, community. This is a big one because there's an assumption that you have friends, or maybe you don't have friends. And we'll get to that later, as in how we look at these preconceived ideas, as in who has friends and who has don't friends. Where even having friends or not having friends becomes something that's positive or negative, such as, oh, look at that person over there, he probably has no friends. Or you even experience ridicule because somebody may not have any friends. Go, you have no friends. There's a lot of people that are like that. And there's people that are like, oh, I bet he's very popular. Look how many friends he has. I mean, it's even come down to collecting friends as almost in the fashion of trading cards. I mean, just look at the way social media works. And we'll get to that aspect of social media much later in these talks. So moving on with society, we have to understand that all the ideas mentioned are subjective. They're subjective. They're not objective. They are made by the general consensus, the ideas, the agreement of a large group, just as we discussed earlier. There isn't one correct way to live. There isn't a path. There isn't one true righteous path that you must follow. I mean, we're all made up of different segmented individual choices that we make, be it in our control or out of our control, and how we react to them. But measuring up against the ideal creates a motive for people to reach. I may not have that house, but I would like a house like that. I may not have that car, but gee, I really would like a car like that. That's how society's creating this compare and contrast ideal where you don't have this, you could have that. And it's all on the ownership, on what you have and what you don't have, even down to the community, the friends that you have. You may belong to a community, you may not. They form a set of ideas that were adopted by the society as a whole. So these ideas that are being presented, number one, are subjective. And on what you have and you don't have, that's subjective as well, because it was adopted generally by the group, not by one single individual who dictates it. Usually, there can be one individual that just dictates, okay, this is the way it's going to go, and if you don't like it, then you're not part of the group. But generally in our contemporary society, there are groups of individuals who get together, enjoy a particular place, item, or the company of others, and people start to see a favorable view. That's usually the way it works, not all the time. But why does this happen? Why do we have to fall into this? And how? How is this all working? I mean, it's a good question to ask. Why and how? Why and how is this starting to happen? So, any ideas? Haha. Ideas mentioned that are subjective? No. So, it's all about control. Thanks to the ideology that is formed, it's about control. It is a comprehensive set of beliefs. This is a set of beliefs and the ideas that construct society. This can include all sets of ideas and beliefs within a society, or just a certain set or subset of ideas within the larger frame. It makes up the dominant ideas of society. Remember, it was a large group, and it was those experienced experiences, you could say, within that group that make up the important aspects, important parts of what we thought was okay and wasn't okay. Usually the outlier was ignored. It was considered, but it wasn't really part of the group. The dominant ideas, the ones that are usually take place or take hold, that is shared by that group, that is mean to be understood within that group, is what takes place. Forms a false consciousness, meaning you could be part of it, or maybe you could not, or maybe you don't even understand. And it's usually created by those in power. This is where I was discussing back on one person could dictate what's to be followed. So those individuals who are in power could say this is the way that the world's going to run. You don't like it? Well, too bad. This is the way the world works. And those who are in power usually have other individuals who are in power who share those same experiences as well. They get together and say, well, this is how we're going to remain in power. Let us distribute the remaining methods of control and power down below us, or laterally, or any way you want to. This ideology is usually created by those in power, for those in power to remain in power. It protects the resources, interests, and positions of those in power. The choices you have available, you believe they are your own. So you could say that, well, I could go to the mall and look at all the stores. I have millions of choices. Well, not millions, but you have quite a bit of choices on what you're going to buy, what you're going to eat. You know, nobody's telling me what to eat. Nobody's telling me what I can't eat or what I can. But let's think about it this way. You have your choices. You have choice one or two. Just imagine that those two dots are two different choices that you have from what's presented as available. And say there are three selections that are available. Take those three X's as the available selections that you have, and you could choose one or the other. Those are your two choices. You go, wow, I have a lot of choices in front of me. I could pick this or that. Staying that, you go to the mall, or say you have to buy something, or say you have a choice in anything, really, and you have that available. You're like, see, I have all those choices available. But what you don't seem to realize is that there's another available choice that's unknown to you, that's outside of this framework of those three X's that are available and those two dots that are your choices. It's outside of the outlier, the one that gets forgotten, or maybe the one that gets pushed away. And it's not really included within that ideology. You have to dig deep and start to think, what else is there? What else can I do? What other choices do I have that are not presented to me? Is there even a choice at all? Are these choices that I have even my own choice at all? And well, you'll be surprised to find that within that ideology, as instated from the definition, it's a comprehensive system of concepts and beliefs held by a group of individuals, meaning with the choices that you had, they were already dictated. And that choice that you thought you had was probably only presented to you. And if you don't know about something, then of course you're not going to have any knowledge about the way that works. And could be political, but we're not a political science class. So it can run that way. But as they say, sometimes it's always politics. And it's not always relating to political science, but just the internal politics, the way something works. They are false systems of concepts invented and preserved by ruling classes out of interest and to remain in power, just as the choices that you had available to you. Say you wanted to buy a pair of shoes. Who made those shoes? Well, usually you walk into a sneaker store. You have one store, and another store, and they usually have two or three brands, and they have some selections. But say you wanted another brand. I run into this problem a lot personally, when I want to go buy a shoe and say, oh, I want that brand. Oh, I'm sorry, we don't carry that brand. So I go to another store. Hey, I want this brand. Oh, no, sorry, I don't have that brand either. So I go to the third store. Do you guys carry that brand? Oh, yeah, we carry that brand, but it's only for kids. Great. So were my choices really mine? Say there was individuals who didn't even know about that brand, who didn't even know it existed. I have gone into stores where I asked for a certain brand and they didn't even know. They had to ask another associate, hey, do you know this brand? No, I haven't heard of it. And they asked somebody else, have you heard of that brand? No. They're like, I don't think that brand exists. Like, really? I'm wearing the shoe right now? Oh, they probably stopped making them until the manager says, oh yeah, that brand, it's probably only order it online. See, there you go. Once that item doesn't exist anymore, then it soon stops being important. But how does this get out? How does this actually get to the public, to the groups, to society? It is by those individuals who have the time, the wealth, the resources in order for you to look at something and say, I have that choice. But otherwise, there wouldn't be no choice at all. You knowing about it may not just be enough, because if enough people don't know about it, then that choice ceases to exist and it's no longer relevant. And I know I'm talking about shoes or an item here, but think about the way of life. Think about something that you needed that couldn't necessarily have been purchased. But in this case, most things rely on purchases. And we'll get to that later. We'll get to that a little bit later and to the why. But usually with an ideology, it's a false set of systems of concepts invented and preserved by ruling classes out of interest and to remain in power. Because if that choice that was available to you would allow you or a group of individuals to make that selection and somehow understand that the ruling classes are somehow ruling you, then it is of no benefit to those individuals who distribute the wealth and remain in power. Because then they will get removed from power and they want to remain in power. That's the way that this ideology works. They want to stay in control. They want to. Why and how? Well, it's another term we're coming up with, because this could be political, social, or moral. It expands a little bit as well. And what is this, you may ask? Well, the proponents of a particular system feel free to dismiss arguments as ideologically based, because they reflect only the ideological biases of the opponent and not the true state of affairs. So, with the proponents of a particular system, you have this way of life, and you go, no, I could have that way of life, or I could have this choice or that choice, and you just start discussing, debating, and arguing. And you can fall into some moral gray areas as well. This tactic could be used to argue against every ideology. It's like, well, I follow this ideology. No, I follow in that ideology. That's what I meant, that you could fall into some moral or political or socioeconomic gray areas that you really tend to not understand. But not everything is black and white, and not everything is going to be laid out clearly and cleanly on the spectrum that you want to see within any ideology. So it usually leads to a clash of modern ideologies in our contemporary society, which becomes a strident and passionate affair dominated more by the use of propaganda than by rational arguments. And usually tend to see this with political campaigns. Usually a lot of people say that's propaganda. You look at one person that you don't like and it's like, oh, he's just spewing propaganda. And you look at the other person, it's like, oh, that's the truth. Then the other person on the other side says, well, no, that guy is saying lies. That he's propaganda. No, my guy's saying the truth. Usually that's the way that our general understanding of propaganda works. But propaganda goes just beyond that. And we'll get to that a little later in this lecture, in that understanding. So how does this all working, and how does this remain stable? Why do we keep this actually around? Well, it's due to a concept called hegemony. And with hegemony, this is once controlled is established. Power and influence are used to keep control. But this isn't necessarily accomplished with force. You're not walking around with some private security or an army saying you must follow this way, you must follow that way. No, it's usually through consent. Nobody forces anyone to follow this. You allow this to happen and you accept it. It is a part of your life. That dominant ideology, there's many people who defend it. As in, well, what am I going to defend? Well, just think about the society that you live in and the society that you care about or what you're working towards. Well, I'm going to get a big house, I'm going to get a nice fancy car, I'm going to have lots of friends, I'm going to get a high-powered job. Well, that's the ideology that you're following. And is anybody forcing you? Is anybody coming to your home or coming to you personally? It's like, hey, you got to do this. No, not necessarily, because you've already seen that. It is already part of that dominant ideology, and the hegemony is what holds and binds that together. That's usually what tells you to follow this way or follow that way. And if you're not, usually means you're breaking hegemony. And we'll get to that part a little later as well. So hegemony is when the dominant worldview becomes the norm. And you're going to hear that word a lot, the norms, 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 norms. Norms just means that something has become normal. These established norms are accepted almost by everyone, the status quo. And the established norms that we talked about a little bit before, that was the home, the transportation, the employment, the community, the friends. Usually that's what in our standard westernized culture and society considered as the norms, that you have a place to live, you have a home, you're stable, you're independent. That's usually what's established by the dominant power. And they're the norms, it's the status quo. And it's a way to exert control on the individual, where this person is supposed to live this way. And if you're not following that way, then usually you could lead to depression. And if you're not following a certain way, well, you feel that you're not understood. And well, a lot of people could say that's sometimes where art comes from. Like, I don't feel that I'm understood in the world. I'm going to draw a picture, paint a picture, write a poem, write a story about it. And that's a good way to express yourself. It's a good way to express yourself and express your frustrations. And it's a good outlet on how an individual can, just see the world differently. And that's usually where good art comes from, because usually everybody assumes a certain way of life. And if you write from a different perspective, or if you look at a painting from a different perspective, or even a movie, a film, even a video game, it creates a new, fresh perspective on something that you may see every day, but somebody else sees it a different way. And you look at that and you're like, wow, I didn't see it that way. That story is just beautifully crafted. I got to read that book over again. I got to read that short story again. Got to see that film again. It's like, wow, I never saw it that way. Or you could just mindlessly see stuff blow up in action films. You're like, ah, yeah, that's what I'm going for. But no, there's different ways that self-expression works, and these established norms fall into that. And anything that's different from that could be seen in a different way, and that's good. Looking at something differently. Artistic expression and such. That's one way as a good outlet. Read more books, write more stories. Just go out of your public library and just find the random story that you haven't heard about, something that wasn't covered in your school, and say, hey, I might check this out. But remember, don't judge a book by its cover. So to keep the order in society and reinforce the dominant ideology. That's how the norms are established. And just as I was talking about earlier with movies as in films blowing up and having that action film or that silly comedy where everybody laughs, or that rom-com or romantic comedy, and it's just pushed and pushed and pushed. That's just reinforcing the dominant ideology through hegemony as well. I mean, if it's something that's different and something that people may not like, maybe that's something that's considered dangerous thinking, then people are like, well, no, I'm not going to go see that. Or maybe say, oh, it's just boring. Why am I going to look into that? There's like no meaning. Or what a lot of people say, I'm already living a depressed, real life. Why do I want to see that on TV? I go to a movie or I watch a film or I read a book, play a video game to escape. I see that to escape from my mundane existence. I don't want to see any of that. Well, the problem with that is that you're not really expanding on your own view, because remember, you're assuming, just like in the beginning of the lecture, that your shared experience is the same as somebody else. But in viewing that film, in reading that book, that's different than your experience. You are expanding on your worldview, that it might be different. The problem is going out and finding this, because so many times we're wrapped up in our own world, in our own limited scope, that we can't find it. We may try hard. I mean, a lot of people go on their cell phone now and go, where? You just try to Google search it or go to a search engine. I can't find it. It's like, hey, just go to your bookstore or go to the library, the local bookstore or the library, and go out and find it. There have been many times where I wanted to find something and I couldn't find it through a normal search engine. I had to go to a library and actually pick it up and find the book. I'm like, yeah, I know I wasn't wrong. I just looked it up in that book, and I could purchase the book, or I could just leave the book there, go back and remember it, take some notes, and I know when I'm expanding on my information, I'm expanding on the knowledge that I know. Otherwise, if I remain in the dark, the dominant ideology is reinforced to keep the order in society. The less you know, the better it is for the individuals who are in power and are in control. It's a system that influences others, so thus those standards become the norm. Those standards that you see around you, such as the home or even just in everyday life, become the norm. And the norm is usually what dictates how the world is followed. From the dominant worldview perspective, from that ideology and the hegemony that's trying to hold everything in place and such. And remember, you break hegemony, you're understanding a different aspect of society, one that maybe the dominant ideology didn't want you to work, didn't want you to work at and understand. Because I mean, really, you go up to a person on the street, it's like, hey, what's the dominant ideology of our society in this culture? Is it dictated by the group or is it dictated by the individual? And how does this have the control through hegemony? The person's going to be like, what the? I don't know, man. I just wanted to go get a burger. It's like, oh, all right then. See you later. But that person wouldn't be getting a burger. Maybe they'd be getting like Starbucks or something. I don't know. They'd be on them. I mean, you go out and you just say you're waiting in line and you discuss the cultural values from the dominant ideology that's imposed on us and the hegemonic constructs that are available. You're gonna be like, what the? I don't know. I'm just in line for this thing. People may get angered. People may get angered and go, man, who's this guy think he is? Throwing all those big fancy words around. I don't know what that means. He's making me feel dumb. He's making me feel stupid. Therefore, if I'm feeling dumb and stupid, That means he's trying to feel like he's smarter than me. I automatically am not going to like that individual. I think I'm going to treat that individual bad. Let me go and talk to another individual who is similar to me. That has my shared experiences. Hey, do you know about all this stuff? No, I'm just here to get this. Oh, yeah, me too. Hey, look at that guy. He thinks he's all smart and stuff. Let's laugh at him. Ha. Then the ridicule happens. And then the comedy that so many people like, it's like, hey, let's go make fun of the outlier. And that's what happens. What is a system that influences others and thus low standards become the norm? So who is different, anybody who's different from from the majority can be ridiculed, could be shunned, or taken in a positive way where art is created, where a short story is created, where a poem is created, a novel, great film, even a very good video game. Video games could be art too. So now we have the definition, the shorthand version of it. The elite worldview makes itself so pervasive in society, it becomes a matter of common sense to almost everybody. So it's just common sense. A lot of people try to use that argument. Oh, it's just common sense. Well, who made up common sense? Well, I don't know. It's just common sense, I don't know. No, that's not the way it works. Understand that common sense was already established by a set group of individuals who decided from objective constructs, this is going to be our common sense. Almost everybody. No, man, common sense is already just talking. No. Now that's when you have to say no. Common sense is not like that. Common sense was created through subjective ideas and concepts that were accepted generally by everybody. It was it became so pervasive that everybody agreed on it. Do we all agree on it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is the way it's going to go, man. You don't like it? All right. No. All right. So you don't want to fall into that because then your own voice gets lost as well. To recognize and understand the hegemony. It's just that worldview where everybody says it's common to everybody. Because control is exerted over the kinds of ideas that are regarded as reasonable or acceptable, just as I was mentioning a little bit earlier. It serves to maintain the existing order, usually through consent and acceptance. And the acceptance of certain ideas, certain films, certain books, it's all around you, even the way people act. The way people act now wasn't the same way people acted maybe 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, even 30. People acted very differently. The way you eat, the way you think, the way you dress, the way you treat somebody else. It all starts to change, maybe for the good, maybe for the better. It all depends on the individuals who are in power and how they want to distribute and exert that control over society. That's hegemony. It keeps that balance, that order for those individuals who have so much at stake to lose to remain in power and exert control. Anything that challenges this is generally not accepted. Alternatives to the status quo seem far-fetched, unreasonable, or even dangerous. Where later on we'll talk about freedom of speech versus hate speech. It's like, it's not my hate speech. That's just freedom of speech. No, that's clearly hate speech. No, who are you to say that? Hate's always going to exist. Well, hate is not really something that's you're born with. Hate is something that is learned. So your freedom of speech is mainly dictated by the choices that are available and how you learn and seem to perceive other individuals. No, you're getting all weird on me. No. Well, just think about it. If your shared experiences with that certain group of individuals, or so far from what you have seen on TV, or even from what you have read, then of course you're going to form that opinion on those individuals. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. It all becomes subjective on how other individuals act upon that as well. And it's all depends on the group versus the individual. Back again, if the group starts seeing it as, yes, this is okay, we agree on it, but that one individual says, no, I'm not going to agree on this, they're like, well, too bad, this is the way that it's going to come down to. This is hegemony, accept it. It's like, no, I have my own, and then the other person says, no, I have my own ideas. Oh, no, that's too dangerous. We're not going to go into that. It's like, just keep those dangerous ideas to yourself. We're not all about that. So anything that challenges the status quo, the dominant ideology, is generally not accepted. It's seen as dangerous. Back in the early formation of the Americas, you had witch hunts. Later on, it was anybody who people didn't agree on. Usually wars could do that. I remember in World War I, there were a lot of people of German descent who were rounded up, and a lot of their businesses got violated. World War II came around. There was Japanese internment camps. Then the Cold War came, and everybody called the communists or red. Then now the big name is terrorist. Are you a terrorist? Are you a terrorist? Dangerous thoughts that go against the dominant ideology, the status quo on how you are perceived or seen. So thus, modern society is not a culture in which all levels of society participate consciously and cooperatively. Only accepted ideas allow the dominant ideology to exist. Just think, how hard did we have to fight for individuals just to get the right to vote? Women, other ethnic minorities. It all just depends on the way that this is seen, on who accepts it or not. And even the term minority, I mean, who came up with that? And, I don't want to get into the whole language aspect of this as I do in other aspects of the lecture, but just in the way that that's seen as well. The language that's being used, which language is accepted. And we could get into that discussion much later on, the ideology of language and the control of language and such, and which languages work. But that's technically hegemony as well. Hegemonic constructs and barriers that are placed on language with individuals that have to learn a certain language. Only the accepted ideas are allowed for that dominant ideology to exist. So let's look at both ideology and hegemony. How are the two related, and how do they function together? How do the dominant ideology and hegemony begin to take hold of society? Advertisements, which then leads to propaganda, which then leads to influence. And I mentioned that propaganda is just a euphemism for advertisements, and we're going to get into that. We're going to discuss that a little further. And how does all of this create influence? Well, let's take a look. We discussed a little about advertisements, where they're found almost everywhere. Everywhere you look, there's an advertisement. You see a sign, that's an advertisement. Something for sale, That's an advertisement. Your favorite sports team, advertisement. Hey, there's my favorite movie. Look at that poster, advertisement. Oh, look at those pants are on sale, advertisement. They present information with simplicity and ease. It's not like you're going to read a novel or a book. It's not an advertisement. Well, I mean, it could be in itself, but generally not so, not the case. You look at a poster and you're like, yeah, that looks pretty simple. I know that information. It's presenting this item. Should I fall into it or not? I think I will. I'm going to go get it. No. So it presents information with simplicity and ease. So you're not looking at a lot of information. Well, I mean, you could have come to a better decision if you're really interested in looking into, say, purchasing a car, a phone, or anything that you want to buy. Or it could be something that you're not buying. Say it's maybe a vote. And vote, yeah, that's an advertisement as well. Political advertisements. They present information with simplicity and ease. And then you look at the language and you're like, what am I getting myself into? Oh man. You're like, I really don't understand this. Vote yes or no. I don't know. Does it raise my taxes? No. All right, then that's cool. Is it going to raise my taxes? Yes. I'm not going to vote for it. Usually, that's what I've heard people say. It's just like, is it going to raise my taxes? Well, no. Then all right, yeah, it's okay. But a lot of people don't even read the information. Read the information that's on voting. That it's important. But usually, as in with advertisements, usually you just see a picture of the item and it's like now this or now that, or it just puts the name of it. It's really simple. I mean, we cover this in advertisements, so I had a whole lecture on it. So, All right. They're almost always colorful. Yay, bright colors. Roy G. Biv. Anybody know what Roy G. Biv is? No? That's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And really, the blue is quote unquote sky or light blue, and the indigo is just a regular blue, and then the violet's purple. But this is just invented by Newton, as in, well, I just want 7 colors, and then the absence of color, and then the concentration of all colors. And that's it. Well, what about brown? Well, I don't know. It's somewhere in there. Well, what about lime green? I guess it's in there too. Well, you get the gist. I mean, even now our hexadecimal codes, I mean, you got to match to, is it a standard sRGB, or are you looking at it on a different scale? Yeah, colors, bright, pretty colors. Most advertisements are on bright, pretty colors. You can even have arguments about different colors, such as I printed my advertisement to be this lime green. Now it looks avocado. It's like, well, that's how it looked like on my computer when I designed it. Well, get your computer checked. Well, see, there's always that discrepancy on the advertisements, as in which color is going to attract. And there's even a science behind the colors, as in red attracts more, does yellow attract more? What kind of customers are you going to get? I mean, it's a very fascinating study, and I'm kind of delving off here, but yeah, colors are important to advertisements. And just as I mentioned, it always promotes a product, or it could even promote a way of life, or even a vote if you're getting into that political realm, that political spectrum. But we know that advertisements just promote materialism. Gotta have it. More is better. And it preys on people who are lonely as well, because some people who don't have others around them in their life, say family or even friends, they could feel that material good fills in that space that a friend may have. Buy goods if you feel alone. And it's important to know that in this time is with you at all times in your cell phone. You pick up your web browser and you look something up, there's always an ad. Go to your social media, ads. Your email, spam, with your ads. It's with you at all times. Have any of you really looked into the different ads that go into your email? You're like, oh, that's a good deal. I'll get that one. You're like, no, that's not really a good deal. I won't go in that one. Or you just hit all delete. Like a lot of people do. But the point is that it's always with you. Advertisements. You carry them with you all around you. It's become integral to you. Unless you don't have a cell phone, which, good for you. You don't need that. You just walk around freely. You're not connected to that. But then you just see it all around you. Ad here, ad there. No escape. Unless you're out on the country and in a field or in the mountains or in the forest and you're like, the ocean, nature. Like, oh man, I just wanted to get away from it all. There's nothing here. And then you forgot to leave your cell phone and you're like, oh, bzz. Like, oh, what's that? Oh, it's an ad for this new thing. Well, I think I'm going to go buy it. I had enough nature. Well, I don't know. That's sometimes the way that it works. But I mean, then it's like, wait, how did I even know about how to get to this place? Well, and I needed fuel. I needed to purchase this fuel. I needed a car. I needed to get all that. And yeah, we can't automatically teleport ourselves to that place, which would be really awesome if you could. Just, I'm going to teleport here, I'm going to teleport there. But believe me, if teleportation was available to individuals, there'd probably be somebody out there try to market it and try to sell it. Oh, look, now a faster teleportation in a longer range where you can go anywhere. I mean, it's usually the way that this ideology and hegemony work, unless individuals were born with teleportation. Then that'd be pretty nice too. But then I'm delving off here. I'm delving off into the sci-fi, and I love sci-fi. Moving on into propaganda. This is where we get into the heart of it. It is a euphemism for advertisements, and it also relates to, but not limited to, commercials, marketing, public relations. All those words are just a nice way of saying propaganda. It's like, hey, do you want to watch some really cool Super Bowl commercials from 10 years ago? Or let us enjoy this propaganda from a decade ago. Which one's going to sound much more appealing to you? Probably the one about Super Bowl commercials, right? Because propaganda has already become a dirty word that people don't like saying unless you want to smear somebody. It's like, you're just looking at propaganda, just you don't need any of that. Or it's like, I'm not going to listen to anything he says or anything that comes from that country or that side of town or from them. That's just propaganda. It becomes a dysphemism, the opposite of a euphemism. Dysphemism, which means bad word. So commercials, marketing, public relations, that stuff that happens between your TV show, that's propaganda. Your TV show, that's propaganda. That social media, that's propaganda. And we'll get more into that later when we discuss social media and media and all that, and how that can be created as propaganda. Is there anything that isn't propaganda? Well, who knows? I mean, you could make the argument that everything is propaganda or that some things aren't propaganda, but I'll leave it up to you to decide that, and if you wanted to have a discussion on that. There's a whole book by Edward Bernays, a book called Propaganda. Go check it out. Pick it up. It's a good read. And propaganda is a useful tool in order to indoctrinate individuals into the dominant ideology and hegemony on just the way that the world works, the way that it's seen, on how the dominant ideology is working with the hegemony. Really nice movie that you like, with action and a lot of fights. The typical hero at the end saves the day. Well, that's also falling into the dominant ideology and hegemony. It's like, oh, what about the hero that does this or does that? It's like, I don't want to watch that movie. That movie's boring. Well, I don't want to watch that movie. That movie's no interest in me. Well, maybe that movie is not falling into the dominant ideology and hegemony that is constructed in our society, or book, or video game. But propaganda is another form of information control. You control the information, and in this case, it is used to purchase material goods. So if you're buying something, you're buying into this product, that product. That's propaganda. Don't let it fool you. Don't think that just because it looks nice and clean and neat, that it's not propaganda. It probably is. The best propaganda is the one that you fight tooth and nail for to say that isn't propaganda. That's something else, because you've already fallen into it. As in, continuing with propaganda, it usually targets individuals who do not seek to expand on their education and knowledge. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, society, not all, but some, looks at learning unfavorably. It's like, oh, what do I got to go to school? It's like, oh man, school again. It's like, oh, when am I going to be done with school? So I can't take it. I got to write more papers, quizzes, homework, assignments. Oh, it's like these teachers don't know I have lives. Well, we do know you have lives. I have a life too. And this is my life, teaching people. So yeah, we're all in it together, brothers and sisters. So buckle down, get set, and let's go, because the less you know, the better it is for individuals to use you, rub you, and exploit you the best possible way. I was like, I don't want to learn all those book smarts. Well, you can have all the street smarts you want, but let me tell you this: which lawyer or doctor you're going to go to? The one with all the street smarts, or the one who actually sat down and read a book to actually learn the information? Well, no, now that you put it that way. Well, yeah, now that I put it that way, just think. I mean, the more you know, the better you are to defend yourself. You know, put down that phone and read a book. In fact, pause this video right now at right this minute. Go get a book and just read the first chapter. Entertaining, educational book. Just go. Just pause it right now. Now, I'll be here. I'll be waiting when you come back and you finish that chapter. Just go and read. You know, just stop this video and go read. Okay, are you back? Or maybe you just ignored and skipped over. No, really, go back. All right, I'll wait. Okay, you really did it this time, for real? Okay, good. All right. So see, wasn't that a lot better? I'm talking to everybody who actually did pause and read a little bit, as opposed to those who just sat here and heard me just rambling on about people not reading. I love to read. I love to read, and you know, the more I could advocate for reading and just, you know, writing, the better the world will become. I promise you that. And some of the aspects common for propaganda to thrive are, well, what do you know? Many people don't read books or even visit libraries. Ask yourself, when's the last time you read a book? I read a lot of your introductions, and wow, a lot of you, you know, you put a book. I don't know if it was to impress me or, you know, because you really like reading, but you know, either way, I'm impressed. You know, reading books are good. When's the last time you visited a library? Well, yeah, it's a little hard in this situation, but yeah, I mean, bookstores are open too. Visit your local bookstore. There's plenty of local bookstores that you could visit. And you're like, oh, there's some information here and there. I promise you, they're not going to throw you out unless you maybe, you know, bring your whole like hamburgers or fajitas and Your ice cream, well, they'll probably just kick you out. Hey, no food around. Then, or I mean, I've stayed hours in a bookstore and just selected and read through countless stories and books. It's the life, Even the library, just go and sit down and just enjoy yourself, read a book. Yeah, it's life, because who doesn't love to learn? But many of you will probably just rely on social media, mass media for information. It's like, oh, I saw this thing on this my social media, and it's this really funny thing. Check it out. It's like, great. What did I learn from that? Nothing. It's just I was like, all right, put that away. It's like, no, I mean, aren't you being stuck up? No, I'm not interested in looking at any of that. Maybe it's not even funny. And or you could get your information just from mass media. Just sit down and watch TV, watch the news or whatever. And you're like, oh, I learned that, I learned this, I learned that. And you're like, oh, I work all day. I'm not gonna have time to read a book or any of that. Well, yeah, you have time. You have enough time to look at your phone every 5 minutes, right? Yeah, put down that phone. Read a book. Read a book. Like, come on now, really. Trying to get you away from the propaganda and such. And exploit others. Why even care about each other? Why have friends if you can't even use them? That's a really bad that's a really bad saying, but there's a lot of people who say that because it's just rampant individualism. As in, I'm only in it for myself. I only care about me. Me, 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 me. It's all about me. Who's first? Me. Who's second? Me. Who's third? Me. Why care about somebody else? I don't really care. It's all about me. Individualism. What's in it for me? That's one aspect that propaganda thrives on in our contemporary society and culture. So this leads to influence. The behavior is influenced through the use of advertisements, propaganda, in order to convince others about promoting a worldview. Money, wealth, resources, kind of the subjective values that dictated what was success and also what pervaded our dominant ideology. It's tied directly to the subjective components of success, just as I mentioned earlier. And it's to remain stable and independent through wealth, utilize education as a means to an end. I'm only going to go to school and so I could get a degree that I'm going to make money. I'm not even going to bother with a degree that I can't do anything with. What's the point, right? Well, no. I mean, if you enjoy studying and learning about that subject, by all means, go ahead. You don't want to just stop and you're like, oh, man, I really love, 20th century poetry, but what am I going to do with it? I'm just going to go study it. I'm just going to go get a STEM degree. And well, yeah, you may have much more options within the science and technology and engineering and mathematic fields with a STEM degree. Is that your passion? Go with what you love. Utilize education as a means to an end. Then it's not going to work out. And then you present the opposition to look and seem unfavorable. As in, then what are you going to do? You're not going to do this, you're not going to do that, then what's going to happen? Those are just some examples. What happens? You look at the opposition in an unfavorable way. I'm not going to learn this, I'm not going to learn that. I want to do this. I want the money, I want the wealth, I want resources, I want to remain stable and independent. If I don't have that, then what could I do? Well, you could go and help out your community. But yeah, what am I going to do without money? Well, you could fundraise. There's other resources available. How am I going to do that if I don't have resources? Well, then you just keep throwing and throwing and throwing. You're trying to defend the dominant ideology through that hegemony as well. So you're presenting the opposition to look and seem unfavorable when the opposition could look quite favorable if you just research and look at a different way of looking at something. Once the public is influenced and convinced on the dominant worldview in this ideology, hegemony allows this worldview to remain in power by establishing the norms through consent and not force. Control the media, you control the economy, and regulations. You write the laws that keep you in power. So those are three aspects on how ideology and hegemony are working in tandem. You control the way the world, what the world sees, what the world hears. You control the resources on how people are actually going to get enough wealth or not enough wealth. And then you write the laws on that. That's simple because it comes as the consensus, the consent, the group that you all agree on it. So let's look at the way that the media is controlled. Number one, social media. Social media is a big one. Just acts as a propaganda. You track the metadata for information and it studies the audience, meaning you, the user interface, what you like and what you don't like. Ever get advertisements for something that you want or something that you don't want? Maybe that's something that you were searching up. Mass media. They own and operate a majority of the networks. They're called conglomerates and they control the narrative. So when you own a good majority of the way they present information, then you control the way the information is distributed, released, and how that narrative is going to work. And really, you don't go against your own interests. You always want to remain in power while allowing the individuals saying to think that they are safe and they have a say. And then there's the suppression of information. Well, we have freedom of speech, but really, our freedom of speech is only free if you own that speech or you own your own press. If you try to say what you want, you don't own the medium to say that, then usually you get in trouble. Then there's hate speech, and we'll get more into that later as well. Lots of hate speech. And say, well, that's suppressing my belief, and then that's suppressing the way I feel. Well, no, not technically, but two different concepts: freedom of speech and hate speech. But really, with the suppression of information, it's censorship. What you can't say, what you can say, how you could say it, different ways on how to censor somebody. But you control the media. It's a good way of suppressing information through mass media and social media. And you could say, well, social media is made up of different individuals that have different ideas. How are you gonna control the way that works? Well, you really wouldn't need to, because if those individuals already follow into the same dominant worldview from that ideology, you have nothing to worry about. It's the individuals who present a different worldview from a different perspective on a different side, those dangerous ideas that you have to worry about. And that's where you could control the user interface. Now we look at how you control the economy. Control the flow of resources. How those resources become distributed is key. You allow only enough to suppress the public, or allow only enough to appease the public, make them happy, or both. How are those individuals going to get their wealth, their resources? Well, they're going to have to work hard for it. How do we suppress the others? Well, they're going to have to work hard for it. Same thing, different side of the coin. You create and establish this system and fall into that control. by creating a system of dependency on monetary value. If any materials or goods are available, make sure society must pay for them. It can be water, food, sleep, comfort, transportation, or energy. When you mean comfort, well, it's like, yeah, I mean, you guys sit down on a couch, you guys sit down on chairs, that's comfort. Carpet on the floor, insulation, that's comfort. Sleep, I mean, how am I going to pay for sleep? Well, you buy a mattress, right? Well, I could just sleep on the floor. Is that comfortable? No. Well, there you go. Food and water, that's a given. You say, well, the water comes through my tap. I'm not paying that. I'm like, really? You don't have a water bill? Oh, yeah, I do. Well, then there you go. And food, spend hundreds of dollars on food a month. Transportation, it's either on car insurance, truck insurance, all that stuff. And energy. Well, what do you mean by energy? Well, we turn on the light switch. Does the light go on? Yeah. Well, that's energy. Usually from fossil fuels. Unless you have a solar panel, then have PG&E pay you. Run that reverse grid. Or those who live in apartments don't have that luxury. But individuals who own their own homes run a lot of solar power. You could even live off the grid. So it all depends on that and how it creates a system of dependency on monetary value. Because with all of that, you need money. You just can't get that for free. Because if you even consider getting that for free, you start getting called a crazy individual or a dangerous individual, depending on who you talk to. So once it is introduced into the system, it becomes part of the social norms in that dominant worldview for that ideology and hegemony. Once you pay for it, then pretty much you're going to pay for that good the rest of your life. Unless you get a free subscription, but that's probably not going to come around for a long time. And then we have regulations. And that's just the laws that are written. You write the rules and laws that keep the order. The dominant worldview and social norms must prevail, but not by force, but through consent and acceptance from society. It's like, well, no one's going to tell me what to do. You follow the law, right? Well, yeah, I have to. Well, there you go. That is consent and acceptance from you, from the rules that were written and made. It becomes pervasive in practice and is seen as, there you go, common sense. And anything else is questioned. You become dangerous, ridiculed. Doesn't end. Regulations are what keeps the order, along with the control of the economy and control of the media. So let's look at what we have so far. We have an ideology. And with the ideology, we have the control of the media and regulations. And we also have the control of the economy. So, those are three important aspects, and they are all connected together. They're all dependent on each other. So what are these connections between them? Well, you already know it. It's hegemony. Those arrows, those lines, that's the hegemony that's holding everything together within that ideology. Control the economy, control the media, the regulations that's being held together for that ideology. And there's a structure of consent and obedience on these ideas, the constructs. You accept them, you obey them. It is what you know. And the systems that are put in place are usually by those that are in power. And let's just say that there's a strong hesitation to move away from the dominant ideology and hegemony, because many people don't want to lose what they already have or venture into something that they don't know. So the dominant ideology remains. It's difficult to break away from that, to break from the ideology, to break hegemony, but many people have. That's how new nations are formed. That's how new philosophies are formed. That's how a new way of life is formed, from breaking away from that. But many people don't want to move away from that, and they would rather just stay comfortable in where they are. So there's that to think about. And just think about this on a personal level, on what you have so far. Is there a better way of life that you feel that exists out there? And if so, what's holding you back from getting it? Not necessarily as in wealth or the resources that you have, but in the betterment of everybody, on how everybody's going to benefit from this, on how we could all move forward together without the divisions, without the prejudice. How? Something to think about. So that was my lesson on ideology and hegemony. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, tune in for the next one. And yeah, let's keep this going. I hope you guys, you enjoyed all this. And yeah, have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much.